Picture a man standing at the edge of his breaking point. His career is on the line after a sudden layoff. His relationships feel strained under the weight of constant stress, and every morning brings a fresh wave of anxiety about the future. This isn't some abstract scenario. It's the reality for countless men today, facing pressures that feel impossible to navigate. But what if the answer to these modern struggles wasn't found in the latest self-help trend or motivational hype, but in the dusty pages of a 2,000-year-old philosophy? Stoicism, the ancient school of thought practiced by Roman emperors, warriors, and thinkers, offers something rare, timeless principles that cut through the noise of modern life. This isn't about suppressing emotions or grinding endlessly without purpose. It's about mastering the art of resilience, clarity, and unshakable focus in a world that's constantly trying to knock you off balance. Imagine harnessing the same mental framework that guided Marcus Aurelius as he ruled an empire, or Epictetus as he turned adversity into strength despite being born into slavery. These men didn't have it easy. They faced betrayal, loss, and chaos on a scale most of us can't fathom. Yet their wisdom wasn't just for survival, it was a blueprint for thriving under pressure. That's exactly what we're diving into today. 25 distilled lessons from Stoic philosophy, tailored for the modern man who refuses to let circumstances dictate his worth. Whether you're battling self-doubt, chasing ambitious goals, or simply trying to build a life of meaning, these principles will reshape how you approach every challenge. This isn't theoretical, it's practical armor for the real world. Stoicism teaches you to distinguish between what you can control and what you can't, to turn obstacles into fuel, and to lead with integrity when shortcuts tempt you. You'll discover how to stay calm in chaos, make decisions with unflinching clarity, and cultivate a mindset that doesn't just endure hardship but grows stronger from it. The stories of ancient Stoics aren't relics of the past. They're battle-tested strategies for anyone tired of feeling overwhelmed by a world that demands more than it gives. So if you're ready to stop reacting and start commanding your life with purpose, let's begin. The journey to unshakable confidence and success starts here. The first lesson from the Stoics cuts straight to the core of why so many men feel exhausted before they even begin their day. Epictetus, a former slave-turned-philosopher, laid it out plainly: some things are within our power and some are not. The key to resilience and real power lies in knowing the difference. Think about the last time you spiraled into frustration. Maybe it was a client who ignored your proposal, a partner who misunderstood your intentions, or traffic that made you late to an important meeting. How much mental energy did you burn raging against circumstances you couldn't change? That's the trap. The Stoics weren't suggesting passivity, they were teaching strategic focus. Your emotions, your effort, your integrity, those are yours to command. The weather, other people's opinions, the stock market, those belong to a category Epictetus called indifference. Not unimportant, but beyond your direct control. Here's where this becomes a modern superpower. Take business negotiations. You can't force a competitor to lower their price or a buyer to say yes. But you can control how prepared you are, the clarity of your pitch, and your ability to listen without ego. I've seen executives waste weeks obsessing over a rival's unfair advantage while neglecting their own adaptability, the one thing that could actually shift outcomes. Or consider personal relationships. You'll never control how someone else feels or acts, but you can choose your own responses with intention. A Stoic approach transforms conflicts. Instead of demanding your friend apologize, you decide whether their behavior aligns with your values and act accordingly. That shift from reaction to ownership is where real strength emerges. Marcus Aurelius faced betrayals from allies and plagues that decimated his empire. His journal reveals a man constantly reminding himself, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." That's the heartbeat of this lesson. When you stop pouring energy into changing what's uncontrollable, you free up reserves for what matters: refining your craft, deepening connections, building resilience that doesn't hinge on perfect conditions. The next time you catch yourself stressing over an external outcome, pause. Ask Epictetus' question, is this within my control? If not, redirect that energy like an archer focuses on his aim, not the wind. That's how modern men turn obstacles into advantage. Marcus Aurelius wrote one of the most radical challenges to modern comfort culture without even realizing it. In his private journals, later published as Meditations, he scribbled a simple phrase that would echo through centuries: love whatever happens to you. This wasn't passive acceptance, it was an active embrace of life's sharpest edges. Centuries later, Friedrich Nietzsche would distill this into two Latin words: amor fati, the love of fate. Not just enduring hardship, but welcoming it as necessary grinding against the blade of your character. Consider how differently most people approach setbacks versus how Stoics reframe them. When a startup fails or a relationship ends, the instinct is to narrate it as a tragedy. But Marcus and Nietzsche argued these moments are the forge where real strength is shaped. Look at James Dyson, the inventor behind the bagless vacuum. Before his success, he built 5,126 failed prototypes over 15 years. Most would see that as a reason to quit. Dyson saw each failure as data points eliminating what didn't work, inching closer to what would. That's amor fati in action, not just persistence, but genuine appreciation for the process of elimination. Or take the story of Thomas Edison's laboratory burning to the ground in 1914. As flames consumed years of research, his response was staggering: "Thank God all our mistakes are being burned up. Now we can start fresh." That's not optimism, it's strategic reverence for life's resets. Modern psychology confirms this mindset's power. Studies on post-traumatic growth show that individuals who practice cognitive reframing, viewing crises as catalysts rather than catastrophes, develop higher resilience and creativity. The Stoics were ahead of their time here. When Marcus faced revolts in Germania or the death of his children, he didn't journal about fairness. He wrote, "The obstacle is the way," transforming barriers into the path itself. This philosophy separates exceptional entrepreneurs from the rest. Sarah Blakely, founder of Spanx, credits her father's unusual dinner table question for her success: "What did you fail at this week?" By reframing failure as proof of effort rather than shame, he wired her to seek challenges. That's the secret source of amor fati. It's not about enjoying pain, but recognizing that friction creates traction. Every rejection sharpens your pitch. Every heartbreak deepens your emotional intelligence. Every financial loss teaches resourcefulness no MBA program can replicate. The practical application: start small. Next time your flight gets cancelled or a client backs out, resist the urge to complain. Ask instead, what does this make possible? Maybe the delay gives you time to refine a presentation. Maybe the lost client frees bandwidth for a better fit. Journal one setback weekly, not with frustration, but with curiosity. How might this serve your growth? That shift from victim to architect is where ordinary men transform into forces of nature. As Nietzsche put it, "My formula for greatness is amor fati, to want nothing different, not in the future, not in the past, not for all eternity." Seneca stood on the rocky shores of Corsica, exiled from Rome by Emperor Claudius, stripped of wealth, status, and everything that defined his old life. Most would crumble under the weight of such disgrace, but in that barren landscape, Seneca discovered something extraordinary. Exile wasn't his prison, it was his laboratory. With no distractions, he produced some of his most profound writings, works that would outlive the empire that banished him. This is the essence of Lesson 3, the Stoic art of alchemy, turning obstacles into engines of creation. Navy SEAL call this mentality the 40% rule. When recruits hit what feels like their physical limit during Hell Week, instructors reveal a brutal truth: they've only tapped 40% of their potential. The remaining 60% is unlocked not by avoiding suffering, but by embracing it as the necessary friction to reveal their true capacity. One SEAL officer described it this way: "The difference between those who make it and those who quit isn't strength or skill, it's the ability to reinterpret pain as progress." That's Seneca's exile principle in action. When his world collapsed, he didn't waste energy lamenting the injustice. He asked, "What can I build with the pieces left?" Silicon Valley's greatest innovators operate on the same frequency. IBM's founders were rejected by every investor during the 2008 financial crisis. Instead of pivoting, they turned their struggle into strategy, selling cereal boxes to fund their startup while honing their pitch. Those cereal boxes became a legendary symbol of resilience, proving their ability to hustle under pressure. Years later, Brian Chesky would say, "Our worst moments taught us more than any MBA ever could." That's the obstacle as way mindset. When funding dries up, you master bootstrapping. When competitors outspend you, you outthink them. Every barrier becomes a curriculum. But here's where Stoicism goes deeper than motivational platitudes. Seneca didn't just endure exile, he dissected it. In letters to his mother, he analyzed exile's psychological hooks, how society's judgment creates internal shackles worse than any island. By naming these mechanisms, he defanged them. Modern psychology confirms this approach. Studies on stress inoculation show that individuals who mentally rehearse challenges in advance, not as threats but as puzzles, develop neural pathways that convert anxiety into focused problem solving. Navy SEAL train this way, visualizing missions so thoroughly that when bullets fly, their brains recognize chaos as familiar terrain. Practical application starts with a simple reframe. Next time you're staring down a setback, a missed promotion, a failed product launch, skip the "why me" phase. Ask Seneca's question: what does this situation free me to do? When a project gets cancelled, it frees time to sharpen skills. When a relationship ends, it creates space for self-discovery. Even physical pain can be repurposed. Ultra runner David Goggins famously transformed his agony during 100-mile races into what he calls the governor's office, a mental space where he negotiates with discomfort rather than fleeing it. The final layer: recognize that obstacles aren't just stepping stones, they're diagnostics. Your reaction to adversity reveals more about your character than any success ever could. When Rome recalled Seneca from exile, he returned not as a broken man, but as a philosopher king whose writings would guide Nero for better and worse. His suffering had become his syllabus. That's the ultimate takeaway. Life isn't happening to you, it's happening for your training. The obstacle isn't just the way, it's the whetstone sharpening the blade of who you're becoming. Ancient Roman generals returning from victorious battles weren't greeted with unchecked celebration. They were shadowed by a slave whispering in their ear, "Memento Mori." Remember, you must die. This jarring ritual wasn't morbid theater, it was psychological armor against complacency. The Stoics didn't see death as a distant abstraction to fear, but as a daily compass for living with fierce intention. Contrast two modern men. One spends his evenings mindlessly scrolling, promising himself he'll start that business someday. The other, diagnosed with a terminal illness, suddenly writes his novel, repairs fractured relationships, and finds joy in ordinary mornings. The difference isn't time, it's the acute awareness that time runs out. Steve Jobs exemplified this practice long before his cancer diagnosis. In his iconic Stanford commencement speech, he revealed a daily ritual, asking himself, "If today were the last day of my life, would I want to do what I'm about to do?" When the answer was no, too many days in a row, he changed course. That simple question, a modern memento mori, forced ruthless prioritization. It's why he dropped out of college to audit calligraphy classes, later inspiring Max typography. why he fired incompetent Apple executives despite backlash, and why he reconciled with his estranged daughter before it was too late. Death awareness didn't paralyze him, it distilled his genius. Now flip the script. Imagine a talented musician perpetually waiting for the right moment to record his album. Years pass, gear gathers dust, and one day he's diagnosed with early Parkinson's, his hands betraying him before his songs ever saw light. The tragedy isn't the disease, it's the unused potential. Psychologists call this the illusion of infinite time, our brain's tendency to procrastinate when deadlines feel vague. The Stoics hacked this flaw by making mortality visceral. Seneca wrote, "It's not that we have too little time, but that we waste so much of it." His letters puncture our excuses, that meeting that could have been an email, the grudges we nurse like treasures, the hours sacrificed to envy of others' highlight reels. Practical application begins with a simple nightly audit. Ask, if today repeated endlessly like Groundhog Day, would I be content with how I spent it? Not grand achievements, but the texture of your focus. Did you trade presence for distraction, postpone hard conversations, choose resentment over resolution? The Roman Stoics kept skulls on their desks not to obsess over death, but to savor life's finite sweetness, like knowing a vacation's end heightens appreciation for each sunset. The ultimate test of Memento Mori's power, legacy. Compare two businessmen at retirement. One boasts a pristine golf swing and a Rolodex of drained contacts. The other built a company that outlives him, mentored successors, and left his family not just wealth but warm memories. Both had the same hours, only one measured them against eternity. Death meditation isn't about leaving a eulogy-worthy life. It's about living so fully that when the end comes, you greet it not with panic, but with the quiet pride of a man who left nothing essential undone. Seneca sat in his study each morning performing a mental exercise that would make most modern men uncomfortable. He deliberately imagined losing everything. His wife dying, his reputation destroyed, his wealth vanished overnight. This wasn't pessimism, it was premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. By visualizing worst-case scenarios in vivid detail, the Stoics stripped fear of its power and uncovered something extraordinary. Even in catastrophe, they could find agency. Centuries later, Navy SEAL would adopt an eerily similar practice called negative visualization, where trainees mentally rehearse missions gone wrong, equipment failures, enemy ambushes, teammates wounded, not to dwell on doom, but to prepare their reflexes for calm under fire. Modern hedge fund managers use this same principle under a different name, stress testing. Before investing millions, they don't just project optimistic returns, they simulate market crashes, liquidity droughts, geopolitical shocks. Ray Dalio, founder of Bridgewater Associates, attributes his firm's survival through multiple recessions to this Stoic habit. In his book Principles, he writes about modeling economic collapses so thoroughly that when 2008 hit, his team didn't panic. They executed pre-planned contingencies like firefighters drilling for a blaze. The key insight, premeditatio malorum, isn't about expecting failure. It's about vaccinating yourself against surprise. When you've already walked through the mental ruins of a lost deal or a bankrupt business, real-world setbacks feel like checkpoints, not dead ends. Elon Musk demonstrates this with SpaceX's early years. Before the first Falcon 1 launch, he publicly outlined 3 probable failures before success. Reporters called it defeatist. Musk knew it was strategic. By normalizing setbacks in advance, he shielded his team's morale when rockets inevitably exploded, and more crucially, he'd already budgeted for those losses. Compare this to executives who bet everything on flawless execution, only to unravel at the first complication. The Stoic distinction here is critical. Seneca didn't visualize disasters to manifest them, but to rehearse his response. Like a chess grandmaster studying in games, he wanted losing moves ingrained in his muscle memory so he'd recognize them mid-game. The practice shines brightest in personal relationships. Consider a man terrified of his wife leaving. Most avoidance strategies, buying gifts, suppressing arguments, are just attempts to control an uncontrollable outcome. The Stoic approach: he sits with the scenario. If she walked out tomorrow, what would I do? Not wallow, but rebuild. He'd lean on friends, rediscover old passions, perhaps grow through solitude. Suddenly, the monster under the bed has proportions. Psychologists call this decatastrophizing, and studies show it reduces anxiety more effectively than positive affirmations. The ancient technique even surfaces in modern cognitive behavioral therapy, where patients confronting phobias are guided to visualize feared outcomes until their brain stops registering them as threats. For entrepreneurs, this translates to the pre-mortem strategy. Before launching a product, gather your team and assume it's failed spectacularly. Why? Maybe pricing was arrogant, maybe onboarding confused users. By naming these risks in advance, you spot blind spots that optimism obscures. Adobe's product teams use this method. Their Kill the Company exercises force employees to brainstorm how competitors could dismantle their business. The result: fewer sacred cows, more adaptive innovation. But here's where Stoicism adds nuance missing from most risk management: emotional inoculation. Seneca didn't just strategize about losing wealth, he practiced feeling poor. He'd wear ragged clothes, sleep on hard floors, eat meager meals, not as self-punishment, but to prove to himself that his happiness wasn't hostage to external comforts. Modern parallels abound. Tech founders like Jack Dorsey regularly take frugality weeks, living on minimal budgets to stay sharp. Fitness guru Joe DeCina forces Spartan race participants to endure cold plunges and hunger, not because suffering is virtuous, but because discovering you can handle discomfort rewires your relationship with fear. The ultimate test of premeditatio malorum: when disaster strikes unannounced. In 2010, a volcano eruption stranded thousands of travelers across Europe. Researchers studied two groups: those who'd mentally prepared for travel hiccups, packing extra medication, downloading offline maps, and those who hadn't. The preparers reported lower stress and faster problem solving, not because they predicted volcanoes, but because they'd built a general resilience to chaos. That's the real gift of this practice. You'll never foresee every curveball, but you can train your mind to treat surprises as familiar opponents. Start small tonight. As you review tomorrow's agenda, pick one priority: a client call, a workout, a difficult conversation, and spend 60 seconds visualizing it going horribly wrong. Then script your comeback. Notice how the edge of fear dulls when you've already walked through the fire in your mind. That quiet confidence, that's Seneca whispering across millennia. The man who has anticipated the coming of troubles takes away their power when they arrive. Musonius Rufus, one of Rome's most influential Stoic teachers, made a habit of sleeping on the hard ground even when soft beds were available. To his students, it seemed like unnecessary hardship. But Rufus wasn't punishing himself. He was conducting an experiment in voluntary discomfort. His logic was simple: if you condition yourself to endure minor hardships willingly, major hardships won't break you when they arrive uninvited. This ancient practice finds eerie echoes in today's biohacking labs and Navy SEAL training grounds, where controlled stress isn't avoided, it's strategically courted. Take Wim Hof, the modern Iceman who climbs frozen mountains in shorts. His method, combining cold exposure, breathing techniques, and mindset training, isn't just about physical endurance. It's a systematic way to teach the nervous system that discomfort is a signal, not a threat. MRI scans of Hof's brain show he can consciously suppress stress responses that overwhelm most people. That's the power of voluntary discomfort. It rewires your relationship with adversity before adversity forces your hand. Special Forces units understand this instinctively. Army Rangers undergo starvation drills where they operate for days on minimal food. not because hunger makes them stronger soldiers, but because it proves to them that hunger won't stop them from completing the mission. In business, the same principle separates resilient leaders from fragile ones. When Howard Schultz was building Starbucks, he deliberately rented modest offices and flew coach even as the company scaled. This wasn't frugality theater, it was anti-fragility training. By denying himself luxuries he could afford, he inoculated against complacency. Contrast this with executives who surround themselves with private jets and yes men, only to panic when market shifts demand austerity. The Stoic twist: Rufus didn't sleep on floors to prove he didn't need comfort. He did it to ensure comfort wouldn't become a need. There's a crucial distinction. Neuroscience backs this ancient wisdom. Studies on stress inoculation show that manageable, self-imposed challenges, like cold showers or fasting, trigger mild stress responses that strengthen the prefrontal cortex's ability to regulate fear. It's the biological equivalent of lifting weights, tearing muscle fibers under controlled tension so they rebuild stronger. Silicon Valley's obsession with discomfort zones taps into this. Elon Musk famously worked from a desk on the Tesla factory floor, enduring noise and discomfort to stay connected to production realities. PayPal's early team held no heat weeks, where they turned off office heating to simulate startup scarcity, a practice that later helped them pivot during the dot-com crash without missing a beat. But here's where modern interpretations often miss Stoicism's nuance. Rufus didn't advocate suffering for suffering's sake, he was teaching discernment. The goal wasn't to live permanently in deprivation, but to prove to yourself that deprivation couldn't control you. This flips the script on hustle culture. Leaping on the floor occasionally isn't about productivity hacking, it's about maintaining sovereignty over your peace. When billionaire investor Ray Dalio takes freezing morning swims, he's not optimizing performance. He's practicing what Seneca called poverty drills, reminding himself that his worth isn't tied to his comfort. Practical application starts small. Try working from a cafe without buying coffee or taking one cold shower a week. Notice the mental chatter, the part of you that insists you deserve comfort. That's the voice voluntary discomfort silences. Over time, these micro-challenges build what Navy SEAL call the 40% rule, the realization that when you feel maxed out, you've still got 60% left in the tank. Rufus knew this 2,000 years ago. The man who chooses his struggles will never be blindsided by them. The ultimate test: watch how you react when involuntary discomfort strikes. A cancelled flight, a power outage. If your first impulse is calm problem solving rather than frustrated entitlement, you've absorbed the lesson. Because true freedom isn't having everything you want, it's wanting nothing you can lose. That's the unshakable ground Rufus was really sleeping on. Epictetus drew a simple circle in the sand for his students, a visual that would revolutionize how we approach social energy today. Inside the circle, what you control: your judgments, actions, values. Outside, everything else: other people's opinions, market fluctuations, even the weather. But here's where most men misinterpret Stoic philosophy. It's not about shrinking your life to fit inside that circle. It's about strategically expanding the circle's boundaries through focused effort. Imagine two neighbors during a recession. One exhausts himself complaining about politicians and corporate greed forces entirely outside his sphere. The other organizes skill-sharing meetups in his community, helping unemployed tradesmen barter services. Within months, the second man's circle of influence grows not because the economy improved, but because he identified leverage points where his effort created ripples. Modern business strategy confirms this principle. High performers don't waste energy fighting industry-wide headwinds. They redirect it toward niches where their specific strengths intersect with unmet needs. Look at how Warren Buffett operates. While most investors chase trends or panic over macroeconomic indicators, Buffett focuses obsessively on his circle of competence, industries and business models he thoroughly understands. This disciplined focus turns volatility into an advantage. When others zig, he's already prepared his zag. The same applies to social impact. Compare two activists. One tweets endlessly about global injustices he can't personally affect, while the other mentors at-risk youth in his zip code. A decade later, one has viral threads, the other has changed actual lives. The military offers perhaps the clearest modern application of this Stoic concept through their commander's intent doctrine. When special forces units execute missions, they're trained to distinguish between fixed parameters, terrain, enemy positions, and flexible ones, approach routes, timing. The most effective operators constantly assess which elements they can influence, then pour creativity into those channels. Former SEAL Jocko Willink describes this as detaching from the outcome while dominating the controllable. In business terms, it's the difference between obsessing over quarterly earnings, external, and relentlessly improving customer service touchpoints, internal. But here's the psychological breakthrough Epictetus uncovered. Influence expands through surrender, not force. When you stop trying to control your boss's mood and instead master delivering results that make his job easier, something paradoxical happens. You gain sway. Ancient historian Cassius Dio recorded how Marcus Aurelius handled rebellious senators. Rather than demanding loyalty, he focused on embodying such unwavering integrity that dissenters voluntarily aligned with his vision. Modern research on quiet leadership echoes this. Employees rank consistently reliable colleagues as more influential than charismatic bullies. Practical application starts with a three-tier audit. First, list your current frustrations, missed promotions, marital tension, health struggles. Next, categorize each by control. Direct your actions, indirect others' responses, or none macro forces. Finally, for every indirect item, identify one adjacent area you can own completely. Stuck behind a paywall at work, shift from resenting management to becoming the team member whose cross-departmental collaborations make you indispensable. Feeling disconnected from your partner, stop waiting for them to initiate meaningful conversations, curate discussion topics that spark mutual engagement. The ultimate test of your circle's expansion, measure energy input versus outcome over 6 months. The man who complains about toxic workplace culture but spends 0 hours mentoring juniors is trapped in Epictetus' outer darkness. The one who converts gripes into guidance, even for just one protege, starts bending the circle's walls outward. That's the alchemy ancient Stoics mastered, not control over the world, but deliberate influence through chosen dominions. Your circle won't encompass the stock market or your father-in-law's biases, but it can grow large enough to build wealth and set boundaries that make those forces irrelevant. Marcus Aurelius never intended his journals to be read by millions. Scribbled by candlelight during military campaigns, those pages were raw self-conversations, an emperor wrestling with doubt, anger, and ambition in real time. What makes his private writing so powerful isn't their poetic brilliance, but their brutal honesty. This is Lesson 8, How to Journal Like a Stoic, transforming scattered thoughts into a strategic tool for modern mastery. Forget the Instagram version of journaling filled with gratitude lists and forced positivity. Stoic journaling is more like a mental gym where you strengthen clarity, expose rationalizations, and sharpen judgment through structured self-interrogation. Start with Aurelius' foundational move, the morning premeditation. Before checking your phone or diving into tasks, answer this question in writing. What virtue will I strengthen today? Not vague affirmations like "be productive," but specific character muscles. Will today test your patience during back-to-back meetings, your courage to have that difficult conversation, your restraint when tempted to gossip? Aurelius modeled this by naming his targets each dawn. When you wake, tell yourself, today I'll encounter meddling, ingratitude, arrogance, but I'll also meet opportunities for kindness, fairness, and focus. Modern research on implementation intentions shows this practice works. A study at McGill University found participants who wrote down not just goals but anticipated obstacles and responses were 270% more likely to follow through. The evening audit is where deeper transformation happens. Seneca perfected this with his student Lucilius, urging him to nightly ask, "What bad habit did I curb today? Where did I act against my principles?" Notice the framing, not "what went well," but "where did I slip and how can I recover?" This isn't self-flagellation, it's precision debugging. Warren Buffett's version involves reviewing his Business Mistakes Journal, where he records every investment error with forensic detail. The key is specificity. Instead of "I lost my temper," unpack the trigger. When Mark interrupted me for the third time, I snapped rather than pausing to realign the conversation. That level of granularity rewires neural pathways. Navy SEAL use after-action reviews with identical rigor, not to dwell on failures, but to create behavioral playbooks for future challenges. Modern psychology validates this ancient practice. Expressive writing studies at the University of Texas show individuals who journal about emotional experiences with analytical depth, linking events to values, examining alternative responses, develop stronger prefrontal cortex activation during stressful events. Essentially, they've rehearsed composure on paper so often it becomes automatic. Cognitive behavioral therapists call this cognitive distancing, the ability to observe your thoughts like data points rather than absolute truths. When Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events," he was practicing this very separation through ink and parchment. Here's your template distilled from Stoic masters. 1. Morning alignment, 3 minutes. What virtue will today demand of me? What distractions will tempt me from it? 2. Evening dissection, 5 minutes. Where did I act inconsistently with my values? Describe the scene like a courtroom witness. What better response lives in my future self toolkit? 3. Weekly wisdom extraction, 10 minutes. Review the week's entries. Circle recurring friction points. Script a Stoic maxim for next time, e.g., "When X happens, I will remember Y." Tech entrepreneur Mark Andreessen adds a ruthless modern twist. He tags journal entries by weakness, e.g., #procrastination, #self-doubt to spot patterns across months. After identifying that hesitation plagued major decisions, he created a pre-committed action list, binding promises to act before doubt could intervene. Deeper than productivity hacks, this practice builds what psychologists call integrative complexity, the ability to hold opposing truths simultaneously. Read Aurelius wrestling with his own contradictions. Be tolerant with others and strict with yourself. Take pride in your work, but don't seek recognition. These tensions, work through daily, cultivate mental flexibility that dogmatic thinking can't touch. The final test of your journal's power, how it changes what you do between entries. When a late-night email triggers you, but you hear your own handwritten words, anger is borrowed suffering, and choose to sleep on it instead of replying in fury, the circle completes. The page becomes your whisper in the chaos, your Stoic mentor distilled into ink. That's when you realize these aren't just words, they're rehearsals for becoming the man crises can't break. Seneca watched in disgust as his neighbor paced the courtyard, boasting about his upcoming vacation to Egypt, his third that year. He tours countries like a spectator, Seneca wrote, but never learns to inhabit his own life. This scene from ancient Rome could play out in any modern airport lounge today. In his blistering essay on the shortness of life, the Stoic philosopher exposed a paradox we still grapple with. People complain about lacking time while actively squandering it on trivialities. His solution wasn't more productivity hacks, but a radical redefinition of what time ownership truly means. Consider two contemporary professionals. The first checks emails compulsively, attends every optional meeting, and fills downtime with social media scrolling, yet feels permanently behind. The second, like Apple's Tim Cook, rises before dawn to protect uninterrupted focus blocks, delegates ruthlessly, and audits every commitment against a simple question: does this align with my core objectives? Both have identical 24-hour days, but one treats time as currency to spend, the other as territory to defend. Seneca would recognize Cook as a modern Stoic practitioner. His famous lament, "Life is long if you know how to use it," wasn't about lifespan extension, but about depth of engagement. The distinction between busyness and value becomes stark when examining how top performers allocate attention. Bill Gates famously conducted Think Weeks, twice yearly, isolating himself in a forest cabin to consume research papers and strategize without distraction. Contrast this with the average knowledge worker whose day gets fractured into reactive fragments. Neuroscientists confirm what Seneca intuited: context switching between tasks can drain up to 40% of productive capacity. The ancient writer warned against those who let everyone else invade their lives, describing them as tenants in their own time rather than owners. But here's where Stoic time management diverges from conventional advice. Seneca wasn't advocating for ruthless efficiency, he was prescribing existential accounting. His scathing critique targeted not just obvious time wasters like gossip or leisure, but socially approved escapism. Endless career ladder climbing without purpose, passive entertainment binges disguised as relaxation. He singled out the elderly Roman who proudly listed all the consuls under whom he'd lived, as if proximity to power meant he'd truly lived at all. Modern equivalents abound: the corporate vice president measuring worth by LinkedIn notifications, the entrepreneur chasing revenue milestones while his children grow up via FaceTime. Practical application starts with a Stoic time audit, more penetrating than any productivity app. For 1 week, track hours in 4 categories. 1. Wealth time investments growing future value learning, strategizing, relationship building. 2. Maintenance time necessary but non-advancing activities, commuting, laundry, obligatory meetings. 3. Poverty time activities draining present and future value, dwelling on grudges, mindless scrolling. 4. Theft time tasks others impose that don't serve your mission, office politics, unreasonable requests. Elon Musk's time boxing method mirrors this. By dividing his day into 5-minute slots and assigning each a purpose, he forces conscious allocation, a practice echoing Seneca's command to keep death before your eyes as a filter for trivialities. The ultimate test: ask not what you accomplished today, but what traces of it will matter in 5 years. That client you entertained but didn't respect. The skill you meant to learn but postponed. Seneca warned that life's greatest theft isn't sudden death, but gradual erosion by unexamined routines. Modern research on dying patients' regrets confirms his insight: the top lament is always time misspent on others' expectations rather than authentic priorities. So tonight, as you power down your devices, hear Seneca's challenge across millennia. You're not short of time, you've just surrendered too much. The clock is your most democratic asset. Every tick asks, will you rent this moment to distractions or own it like a sovereign? Marcus Aurelius had a nightly ritual that would baffle most modern executives. Before sleep, he'd close his eyes and perform a mental exercise called the view from above, projecting himself into the cosmos to gaze down at Earth's speck of dust, watching his problems shrink against the vast theater of stars and centuries. This wasn't escapism, it was strategic detachment. The emperor understood something we've forgotten: the closer you stand to a problem, the larger it looms. Like pressing your nose against a painting until all you see are blurry brushstrokes, we lose perspective in the daily grind. But when astronauts like Chris Hadfield describe seeing Earth from orbit, wars, borders, and personal dramas reduced to irrelevance, they're channeling the same Stoic shift. Take workplace conflicts. A project manager obsesses over a colleague's snide remark in a meeting, replaying it for days. But if he practices the cosmic perspective, he might ask, in 5 years, will this comment matter? In 50, against the timeline of human progress, does one ego clash register at all? This zoomed-out view doesn't minimize real pain, it contextualizes it. Research from the University of Michigan shows that people who practice temporal distancing, imagining how they'll feel about an event in the future, make more rational decisions under stress. Aurelius was hacking this cognitive process centuries before fMRI scans proved its efficacy. The technique shines brightest in strategic planning. Jeff Bezos famously applies his 10,000-year clock mindset to Amazon decisions, asking whether initiatives will matter decades hence. Contrast this with competitors chasing quarterly earnings at the expense of lasting value. The view from above reveals which mountains are worth climbing and which are molehills in disguise. When SpaceX engineers faced repeated rocket explosions, Musk had them analyze failures not as disasters, but as data points in humanity's multi-century march toward multiplanetary existence. That cosmic framing transformed morale from despair to determination. But here's where modern Stoics must adapt the exercise. Ancient philosophers imagined looking down from mountaintops or celestial spheres. Today, we have actual images from the Hubble telescope, pale blue dots swimming in infinite black. Use them. Keep a satellite photo of Earth on your desk or phone. When buried under deadlines, pause and stare at that pixel. Your urgent report won't shift continental plates. That angry email thread won't alter planetary rotation. This realization isn't depressing, it's liberating. It frees you to focus energy where you truly have leverage. NASA psychologists training astronauts for isolation in space stations stumbled upon a parallel insight. Candidates who frame missions as contributions to human exploration handle confinement better than those fixated on personal discomfort. Aurelius would nod in recognition. His journals repeatedly return to this theme. Think of the whole universe whereof you are a tiny part, and of the whole of time wherein you've been assigned a brief and fleeting moment. Not to induce insignificance, but to clarify purpose, try this tonight. Stand outside under open sky or use a stargazing app. Trace the arc of the Milky Way with your finger, then mentally superimpose your daily worries onto that scale. Notice what happens: the coworker who takes credit for your ideas, a blip, the missed promotion, a ripple. What remains is what always mattered: your integrity, your growth, your capacity to contribute to something larger. That's the final gift of the cosmic perspective. It filters out noise so you can hear your true calling. The stars don't care about your inbox, but they'll bear witness to the legacy you build beneath them. Epictetus spent his formative years in chains, a slave in Nero's Rome. Yet he discovered something revolutionary. While his body wasn't free, his emotions could be. His famous dictum, "Men are disturbed not by things, but by the views they take of them," wasn't philosophy. It was an operating system for emotional freedom. Modern neuroscience validates this ancient insight with startling precision. When your heart races during a heated boardroom debate or your palms sweat before a crucial pitch, it's not the situation itself triggering those reactions, it's your brain's interpretation. The amygdala, your threat detection system, doesn't respond to objective reality. It fires based on perceived danger. Epictetus uncovered this mechanism 2,000 years before brain scans existed. Professional negotiators have weaponized this principle. Chris Voss, former FBI hostage negotiator, trains executives in what he calls tactical empathy, consciously reframing adversarial encounters as collaborative problem-solving sessions. When a counterpart raises their voice, most people's amygdalae trigger fight or flight. Voss teaches clients to reinterpret that outburst as valuable data. This person feels unheard. That cognitive shift from threat to signal changes everything. Your blood pressure stabilizes, your prefrontal cortex stays online. You gain the upper hand not through dominance but through detachment. This isn't manipulation, it's emotional aikido, redirecting chaotic energy into constructive outcomes. The biological mechanics are fascinating. During high-stakes conflicts, cortisol floods your system, narrowing your focus to immediate threats. A survival advantage in caveman times, but disastrous when you need nuanced thinking. Navy SEAL use a counterintuitive trick. They exhale slowly, activating the parasympathetic nervous system. This isn't just breathing, it's hacking the autonomic system. Epictetus prescribed a similar interrupt. When you're offended by someone's actions, pause and ask, what interpretation of this event is causing my distress? That moment of metacognition, thinking about your thinking, creates just enough space for the prefrontal cortex to override primal reactions. Business leaders face this daily. Imagine two CEOs receiving identical acquisition offers with aggressive terms. The first takes it personally, his indignation clouding strategic analysis. The second, trained in Stoic reframing, views the lowball bid as information. Perhaps the buyer has liquidity constraints or sees risks he's missed. By separating the offer from his ego, he maintains leverage. Psychologists call this cognitive diffusion, the ability to observe thoughts as passing weather patterns rather than absolute truths. Warren Buffett exemplifies this when he says, "The stock market is a device for transferring money from the impatient to the patient." He doesn't personify market fluctuations as attacks, he analyzes them as phenomena. Practical application starts with pre-crisis rehearsal. Special forces units don't wait for gunfire to practice composure. They simulate stress through brutal exercises until calm becomes reflexive. Adapt this by mentally walking through high-pressure scenarios you anticipate. If you're preparing for salary negotiations, visualize the employer dismissing your requests. Rather than scripting comebacks, focus on physiological control, steady breathing, relaxed posture, measured speech. Neuroscience shows that pre-visualization creates neural pathways that activate automatically when real events unfold. The final layer, emotional contagion management. Human brains contain mirror neurons that unconsciously mimic others' emotional states, which is why anger spreads like wildfire in meetings. Stoic practitioners break this chain by consciously adopting neutral body language when tensions rise. Folded arms amplify conflict, open palms signal receptivity. Your physiology shapes your psychology as much as the reverse. British diplomats during the Blitzkrieg epitomized this by maintaining calm routines amid bombings. They prevented mass panic. Their secret wasn't suppression of fear, but the disciplined redirection of attention toward controllable actions. Epictetus' most radical idea was that emotional mastery isn't about controlling external events, it's about governing your internal narratives. Modern brain science confirms that the stories we tell ourselves, "This setback proves I'm inadequate," versus "This reveals where I need growth," literally rewire neural circuits over time. The next time you're in a heated discussion, notice the gap between stimulus and response. That space, however brief, is where your freedom lives. Master it, and no negotiation, conflict, or crisis can shake your foundation. That's not just emotional intelligence, it's emotional sovereignty. The Stoics measured a man not by the applause he received, but by the standards he refused to compromise even in darkness. Consider the Roman general Scipio Africanus, who slept on the hard ground alongside his soldiers during campaigns, refusing special treatment despite being the conqueror of Carthage. When rivals later accused him of embezzlement, he tore up his account books before the Senate, declaring, "On this day I defeated Hannibal, that is my ledger." His reputation took a hit, but his character became legend. Fast forward to today's LinkedIn influencers meticulously crafting personal brands, measuring worth in likes and connection requests. The chasm between these two worlds reveals a profound question. Are you building a facade that shines or a foundation that endures? Social media's reputation economy operates on what psychologists call impression management, curating highlights to manufacture perceptions. But the Stoics recognized a dangerous flaw in this approach. Reputation is hostage to others' opinions, while character is sovereign territory. Marcus Aurelius faced this directly when whispers circulated about his wife's infidelity. Rather than publicly shaming her to preserve his image, he privately upheld his marital vows with dignity, writing in his journal, "It's what you do when no one's watching that defines you." Centuries later, psychologist Carl Jung would identify this as the shadow self, the parts of our identity we hide to maintain social approval, the Stoic alternative. Radical integration, aligning public actions with private principles so completely that reputation becomes irrelevant. Business history offers stark contrast. Compare two 19th century industrialists, John D. Rockefeller, who donated millions anonymously before later seeking PR, and Thomas Edison, who staged publicity stunts like electrocuting elephants to discredit competitors' technology. Rockefeller's philanthropy flawed, though it was created lasting institutions like the University of Chicago. Edison's theatrics damaged his credibility among fellow scientists despite his genius. The pattern holds today. Patagonia's Yvon Chouinard transferred company ownership to environmental trusts without fanfare, while WeWork's Adam Neumann courted viral fame right up until his empires collapsed. Character compounds quietly, reputation evaporates loudly. Modern neuroscience explains why this works. When our actions contradict our values, the brain's anterior cingulate cortex fires distress signals, a phenomenon called cognitive dissonance. Social media exacerbates this by rewarding performative virtue over authentic growth. The Stoic remedy, daily integrity audits, ask not, "How will this look?" but "Does this align with my core beliefs?" Warren Buffett's newspaper test embodies this, imagining whether your business decisions could withstand front-page scrutiny. But the Stoics took it further. They'd ask if you'd still make the same choice if guaranteed no one would ever know. Military leadership provides the ultimate testing ground. General James Mattis carried Marcus Aurelius' meditations into combat, insisting officers prioritize troops' welfare over medal chasing. When Navy SEAL candidates endure Hell Week, instructors don't evaluate based on who finishes first, but on who shares water with struggling teammates despite exhaustion. These are character gauntlets, deliberate choices between convenience and principle. The practical pivot: audit your last 3 major decisions. Did external validation influence them more than internal conviction? That gap is where reputation bleeds into character. Social media metrics are fickle currencies, but the man who builds his life on virtue owns something no algorithm can devalue, a self that needs no filter. As Epictetus, the former slave, put it, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish, because the only reputation worth having is the one you'd maintain even if everyone misunderstood you." Cato the Younger stood alone in the Roman Senate, his toga deliberately unadorned, his sandals worn thin. Around him, politicians whispered and plotted, their loyalties shifting with the winds of power. But Cato's presence silenced the room, not because he commanded armies or wealth, but because his unwavering principles had earned him something rare: moral authority. This is the paradox of Stoic leadership. While modern management gurus obsess over charisma and persuasion tactics, ancient Rome's most effective leader never raised his voice or compromised his values, yet his influence shaped the course of an empire. His secret, a leadership style built not on controlling others, but on mastering himself first. Take crisis management. When Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon with his legions, an act of treason that plunged Rome into civil war, most senators panicked or defected. Cato responded differently. He didn't waste energy on outrage over what he couldn't change. Caesar's army was already marching. Instead, he focused on what he could control, preserving the Republic's ideals. While others fled, he organized resistance in the Senate. When outmatched militarily, he turned the conflict into a moral struggle, exposing Caesar's ambition so clearly that even neutrals felt compelled to choose sides. Modern executives can learn from this playbook. When a scandal hits your company, do you pivot immediately to damage control, or do you first anchor your team to core values? Howard Schultz demonstrated this during Starbucks' 2008 crisis. Instead of just retraining baristas after a store closure debacle, he shut 7,000 stores nationwide for racial bias training, sacrificing short-term profits to realign the company with its principles. Like Cotto, he understood that true leadership isn't about avoiding storms, but about proving the ship won't sink when they come. Culture building offers another masterclass. Cotto lived so consistently by his Stoic values that his personal conduct became a silent curriculum for Rome's youth. He refused bribes when corruption was standard, slept on campaign cots when entitled to beds, and famously walked Rome's streets barefoot in rainstorms to harden his discipline. These weren't publicity stunts, they were living demonstrations of an operating system. Compare this to modern startups where culture decks proclaim values like transparency, while founders hide financial struggles from employees. Patagonia's Yvon Chouinard mirrors Cotto's approach. When implementing environmental policies that hurt profits, like using recycled materials, he didn't just issue memos, he personally hauled trash from Yosemite trails alongside interns. Visibility matters. The Stoic leader knows that culture isn't written on walls. It's etched into daily actions teammates can witness, the most counterintuitive lesson. Cotto's power grew precisely because he didn't seek it. While Pompey and Caesar maneuvered for titles, Cotto consistently turned down promotions that required moral compromise. This apparent weakness became his ultimate strength. When he finally accepted a role, his reputation for integrity made his authority unchallengeable. Modern parallels abound. Abraham Lincoln filled his cabinet with rivals because their trust in his fairness outweighed ambition. More recently, Microsoft's Satya Nadella transformed the company's cutthroat culture not by asserting dominance, but by demonstrating vulnerability, admitting his own learning curve when shifting to cloud computing. This Stoic approach flips conventional wisdom. Influence expands when you stop chasing it. Practical application starts with the morning mirror test. Before reviewing KPIs or emails, ask, what principles will guide my decisions today? Not generic values like honesty, but specific behavioral guardrails. Will you take the difficult meeting instead of delegating it? Will you publicly credit a junior employee's idea? Next, conduct Cotto audits. For every leadership decision, assess whether you're choosing convenience over character. Finally, embrace what Stoics called the discipline of assent, pausing before reacting to crises to distinguish facts from interpretations. When a project fails, do you see catastrophe or a chance to demonstrate calm problem solving? The ultimate test of Stoic leadership came during Cotto's final hours. Cornered by Caesar's forces, he chose suicide over surrender, not as defeat but as a final assertion of autonomy. While extreme, his death cemented his legacy as Republic's conscience. Modern leaders won't face literal swords, but they confront daily choices between principle and expediency. Every time you protect an underperforming executive because they're a friend, or fudge numbers to please shareholders, you cross your own Rubicon, the Stoic alternative. Let your team see you choose right over easy until they start doing the same. That's how cultures outlast individuals and how real authority is earned one uncompromised decision at a time. Seneca lounged in his marble bath, steam rising around him as he dictated letters about the virtues of poverty, a scene that captures the central paradox of Stoic wealth. The philosopher who amassed one of ancient Rome's greatest fortunes insisted that money was neither good nor evil, but a test of character, his insight. You haven't truly mastered wealth until you can lose it without losing yourself. Fast forward to modern Silicon Valley, where tech billionaires sleep in $500,000 tiny homes and wear decade-old hoodies. This isn't hypocrisy, it's a deliberate practice of what Seneca called wealth without chains, the art of building abundance while resisting its psychological grip. Consider two entrepreneurs who sold their startups for identical sums. The first buys a fleet of supercars, upgrades to a 20,000 square foot mansion, and measures success by Instagram flexes. The second continues living in his modest apartment, invests the windfall into anonymous scholarships, and still flies economy. Both are wealthy, but only one is free. Warren Buffett embodies this Stoic ideal, the third richest man on earth, yet living in the same Omaha house he bought in 1958 for $31,000. His reasoning: "I'd need a brain transplant to change my lifestyle." That's Seneca's philosophy in action: money as a tool for creation, not a prop for validation. The biological trap of wealth is why this lesson matters. Neuroscience reveals that luxury purchases trigger dopamine spikes identical to drugs, intense but fleeting. Soon, the $5,000 watch becomes your new normal, requiring a $10,000 upgrade for the same thrill. Seneca identified this treadmill 2 millennia ago. It's not the man who has too little who's poor, but the one who always wants more. Modern minimalists like Patagonia's Yvon Chouinard hack this cycle. Despite his billion-dollar net worth, he still repairs his own gear and drives a beat-up Subaru. His company's mission statement sums it up: build the best product, cause no unnecessary harm, use business to inspire solutions to the environmental crisis. Profit fuels purpose, not the reverse. Practical application starts with what financial planners call enoughness calculations. Before chasing another zero, define your actual needs. Podcasting pioneer Tim Ferriss uses a simple filter. If I had $10 million liquid, would I still be doing this? Not to enable laziness, but to distinguish between authentic goals and conditioned hunger. Tech investor Naval Ravikant takes it further with mental accounting, dividing wealth into 3 buckets. 1. Security enough to cover basic needs indefinitely. 2. Comfort upgrades that meaningfully improve quality of life. 3. Luxury everything beyond, which research shows adds negligible happiness, the Stoic twist. Once bucket 1 is filled, the rest becomes optional, and therefore liberating. Seneca's most provocative idea was the pre-loss drill. He'd periodically practice poverty by wearing threadbare clothes, eating peasant food, even sleeping in his shabby villa entrance hall. These weren't masochistic exercises, but immunity training against fortune's whims. Modern equivalents include no-spend months, where high earners live on rice and beans, or billionaire Sarah Blakely's habit of keeping an empty bank account to avoid complacency. The goal isn't self-denial, but remembering that your worth isn't stored in digits on a screen. The ultimate test comes during downturns. When the 2008 crash wiped out millions, those who'd internalized Seneca's wisdom responded differently. Some panicked, selling assets at lows to preserve lifestyles. Others, like investor Monish Pabrai, stayed calm. His frugality meant his security bucket remained intact. As markets recovered, his patience turned crisis into opportunity. That's the hidden superpower of unattached wealth. It leaves you liquid financially and psychologically when others are desperate. So tonight, as you check your portfolio or savings, ask Seneca's question: what's the smallest amount that would let me live my truest life? Not the number that impresses strangers, but the figure that lets you wake up each morning free to pursue what matters. That's the sweet spot where money stops being a master and becomes what it was always meant to be: a silent partner in your unshakable independence. Musonius Rufus stood before his students in 1st century Rome, shattering cultural norms with a single radical idea. True friendship isn't about social climbing or transactional favors. It's a sacred bond where two people become guardians of each other's virtue. While most Roman elites treated relationships as networking opportunities, this Stoic teacher insisted that every connection should be a mirror reflecting your highest self back to you. His guidelines for relationships read like an ancient antidote to modern loneliness, a world where linked-in connections multiply while authentic bonds atrophy. The Stoic approach to human connection isn't about accumulating contacts, but about cultivating a few relationships so sturdy they become psychological lifelines during life's storms. Take marriage, which Rufus called the highest form of friendship. Unlike romanticized notions of effortless compatibility, he framed it as a joint venture in moral excellence. Picture two entrepreneurs launching a startup, except the product is their shared character. When disagreements arise, the Stoic partner doesn't keep score or retreat into resentment. Instead, they ask, how does this friction reveal where I need growth? Modern research validates this approach. Couples who view conflicts as opportunities for mutual improvement, rather than battles to win, have divorce rates 60% lower than average. John Gottman's legendary relationship studies at the University of Washington echo Rufus' ancient wisdom. The healthiest marriages aren't conflict-free but repair-focused. Boundary setting in Stoic relationships follows a similar framework. Rufus taught that saying no with integrity isn't rejection, it's respect for both parties' dignity. Imagine a colleague constantly dumping last-minute work on you. The passive response breeds resentment, the aggressive reaction burns bridges, the Stoic alternative. A calm assertion, I can't take this on now without compromising existing commitments, but here's when I could help. This preserves the relationship while honoring your limits. Tech executive Sheryl Sandberg operationalized this at Facebook by implementing no Wednesdays, blocks of time where even junior staff could decline meetings to focus on deep work. Productivity soared because boundaries created space for meaningful contribution rather than fractured attention. Professional relationships transform under Stoic principles too. Rufus warned against friendships built solely on utility, the ancient equivalent of networking for favors. His litmus test, would you trust this person with your secrets in hard times? Warren Buffett applies this filter at Berkshire Hathaway, valuing partners whose handshake deals hold firm when markets crash. Contrast this with Wall Street's transactional relationships that dissolve at the first whiff of scandal. The Stoic approach to business connections mirrors their view of wealth. Surround yourself with people who sharpen your character, not just your opportunities. The modern crisis of male loneliness reveals why this lesson matters. Harvard research shows 1 in 3 men under 30 has no close friends, a threefold increase since 1990. Social media creates the illusion of connection while starving actual intimacy. Rufus' solution, structured vulnerability. Stoic friendships weren't stiff, emotionless affairs. They were safe harbors where men could admit fears without judgment. The military exemplifies this today. Navy SEAL conduct after action reviews where teammates critique each other's performance with brutal honesty, then grab beers together. That balance of candor and loyalty is what Rufus meant by friendship as alchemy, transforming raw truth into unbreakable trust. Practical application starts with a relationship audit. List your inner circle friends, mentors, romantic partners. Next to each name, note whether they 1. Challenge you to grow, not just validate you. 2. Respect your boundaries when asserted. 3. Share core values despite surface differences. Those meeting all 3 are your modern Stoic allies. For the rest, consider gradual distancing or candid conversations to recalibrate expectations. The goal isn't perfection, but intentionality, recognizing that every relationship is a gymnasium for your character. Rufus' most counterintuitive teaching. Sometimes the most loving act is releasing toxic relationships, not with drama but quiet finality. When a student agonized over cutting ties with a dishonest friend, Rufus asked, "Would you let a surgeon operate on you if he lied about his training?" Emotional proximity requires higher standards, not lower. This explains why Steve Jobs famously fired people who called themselves friends but delivered mediocre work. Harsh, perhaps, but Stoic relationships thrive on shared excellence, not sentimental excuses. The ultimate test comes during adversity. When psychologist Jordan Peterson faced severe health crises, his inner circle, mostly longtime academic rivals, mobilized to fund his treatment and protect his family. These were men who debated him fiercely for years, yet honored the deeper bond of mutual respect. That's the Stoic ideal: relationships forged not in the easy fires of agreement, but in the hard kiln of earned trust. Start today. Reach out to one person who makes you better. Thank them not for what they do, but for who they inspire you to become. That's the alchemy Rufus promised, where ordinary connections transform into lifelines of iron. Marcus Aurelius never wrote philosophy for ivory towers. He scrawled battle plans for daily life. His journals reveal the core Stoic discipline, bridging the gap between knowing what's right and consistently doing it. This gap is where modern men falter. We devour self-help books but can't translate insights into sustained action. The Stoics solved this with what they called the discipline of action, a systematic approach to making virtue operational. Not grand gestures, but microscopic daily choices that compound into unshakable character. Start with the Stoics' master key: micro commitments aligned with macro values. When Epictetus said, "First tell yourself what kind of person you want to be, then do what you must do," he was outlining a feedback loop ancient athletes knew instinctively. Olympic wrestlers didn't just train for gold, they tied every meal, every sunrise sprint, every recovery ritual to their identity as champions. Modern research on identity-based habits confirms this. A study in the Journal of Health Psychology found smokers who reframed themselves as non-smokers rather than people trying to quit were 3 times more likely to succeed. Your morning workout isn't about burning calories. It's a vote for the kind of man who honors commitments to himself. Business strategy follows the same pattern. Jeff Bezos' regret minimization framework, imagining himself at 80 looking back on decisions, turns abstract values into concrete filters. Should Amazon expand into cloud computing in 2003? Not a spreadsheet question, but an identity one. Would the visionary I aspire to be seize this? Contrast this with executives who outsource integrity to compliance departments. The Stoic approach demands personal ownership. When Howard Schultz returned as Starbucks CEO in 2008, his first act wasn't restructuring finances, it was retraining every barista on espresso technique. Symbolic, yes, and that's the point. Values manifest through visceral actions, not PowerPoint mission statements. Parenting becomes fertile ground for this discipline. Ancient Romans like Cato didn't just lecture sons about virtue, they modeled it through relentless consistency. Plutarch records how Cato refused to wear fine clothes even during official duties, ensuring his children associated status with service rather than privilege. Modern parallels exist. Tech CEO Frank Slootman bans phones at family dinners not as punishment, but as lived proof that presence trumps connectivity. The key: daily rituals that make values tangible. A father teaching his daughter to journal failures celebrates growth. One who hides his own mistakes teaches performance anxiety. Actions are the curriculum. Implementation requires 3 modern adaptations of Stoic practice. First, the evening audit, sharpened for contemporary life. Instead of vague reflections, use a 3-column log. 1. Planned virtue, e.g., patience during team conflicts. 2. Actual behavior, detailed replay of reactions. 3. Course correction, 1 micro-adjustment for tomorrow. 2nd. Leverage, commitment devices, external constraints that lock future you into alignment. Ancient Stoics used public oaths. Today's equivalents include donating to causes you oppose if you break streaks, stick K. Calm, or scheduling workouts with rivals who'll call out slackness. Finally, adopt the 2-minute drill for moral crises. When torn between convenience and principle, ask, what would the man I'm becoming do in 2 minutes? Not a lifetime commitment, just the next 120 seconds of integrity. That's how compound growth works, small, consistent deposits in the bank of character. The ultimate test comes when no one's watching, like the Roman soldier who returned extra coins to the treasury despite no oversight, or the modern entrepreneur who discloses a billing error that nobody caught. These moments reveal the discipline's purpose, not just to act rightly, but to need less willpower to do so over time. Your future self is sculpted by today's microscopic choices. Start chiseling. The ancient Stoics didn't separate gymnasiums from philosophy schools. They saw physical training as the forge where mental resilience was hammered into being. When you picture Marcus Aurelius, you might imagine a robed scholar scribbling in a candlelit study, but historical records show he trained in wrestling and combat daily, believing a weak body made the mind vulnerable to indulgence. This fusion of sweat and wisdom wasn't about vanity, it was about voluntary hardship as preparation for life's involuntary trials. Modern fitness culture often misses this connection. We chase six-pack abs or marathon times while ignoring the deeper purpose Stoics championed, using physical strain to condition the mind's response to adversity. Consider the contrast between two gym-goers today. The first obsesses over muscle symmetry and Instagram filters, abandoning routines when results plateau. The second, following Stoic principles, designs workouts specifically to induce discomfort, holding plank positions until trembling, running hill sprints in the rain, or practicing cold showers post-training. His goal isn't aesthetics alone, but the cultivation of what Navy SEAL call the 40% rule, the realization that when your body screams to quit, you've only tapped a fraction of your true capacity. The ancient Greek concept of arete excellence fused physical and moral virtue. A Stoic workout isn't complete until it's stretched your patience, discipline, or pain tolerance alongside your muscles. Practical application starts with reframing exercise as mental training first. Try this Spartan-inspired protocol rooted in Stoic principles. 1. Pre-workout contemplation 2 minutes. Stand motionless before exercising and ask, what quality will this session strengthen beyond my physique? Is it perseverance through fatigue, composure under strain? Write one word, e.g., fortitude, on your forearm as a reminder. 2. The discomfort pyramid, structure set so the final rep feels impossible. Then pause for 3 breaths and complete 2 more. This mimics life's demands. Solutions often emerge just beyond the point of wanting to quit. Weightlifters call this greasing the groove. Stoics called it voluntary obstacle practice. 3. Environmental hardship drills. Once weekly, replace climate-controlled gym sessions with outdoor training in extreme conditions, snow runs, midday sun sandbag carries. The Romans marched legions 30 miles in full gear, not just for fitness, but to prove to soldiers that terrain couldn't dictate their morale. 4. Post-exertion journaling. Record not just weights and reps, but emotional responses. Did frustration during burpees reveal impatience you also display in traffic jams? Did negative self-talk emerge at mile 4 of your run? These are diagnostic tools for character. Legendary strength coach Dan John mirrors this approach with his park bench rule. Train like you're preparing to lift a collapsed bench off a child, not for mirror muscles. When UFC champion Georges St. Pierre trained, he'd intentionally have coaches yell insults during sparring, not because he enjoyed abuse, but to simulate the mental chaos of championship rounds. That's Stoic fitness in action, engineering controlled adversity to inoculate against life's unpredictability. The biological magic lies in stress crossover. When you deliberately hold a cold shower for 30 seconds longer than comfortable, you're not just building cold tolerance, you're strengthening the anterior cingulate cortex, the brain region governing willpower that also helps resist procrastination and impulsive decisions. Neuroscientists at the University of Pennsylvania found subjects who completed grueling physical challenges showed improved cognitive endurance on unrelated mental tasks afterward. The Stoics intuited this. By mastering the body's resistance, you train the mind to override discomfort in all domains. Modern tech entrepreneurs have rediscovered this nexus. Twitter co-founder Jack Dorsey runs daily 5-mile sprints followed by ice baths. Biotech CEO Dr. Peter Attia stays keto-adapted so his body learns to function during glycogen depletion, a physical parallel to Stoic premeditatio malorum, premeditation of evils. The common thread, they're not just building bodies, they're stress-testing psyches. For those without hours to train, the Stoic solution is elegant. Integrate micro-challenges into existing routines. Take last set visualization, or when lifting weights, imagine the final rep as a metaphor for a current life obstacle, a looming deadline, a difficult conversation. Push through while mentally reciting an empowering phrase like, "This is the way," a nod to Marcus Aurelius, "The obstacle is the way." Over time, your brain wires physical stamina to emotional resilience. The ultimate test comes when real crises hit. A firefighter who's practiced breath control during grueling workouts will instinctively regulate panic in a blazing building. A father who's endured marathon training sessions taps that reservoir when pacing a colicky baby at 3 a.m. Physical stamina becomes emotional currency. That's the Stoic edge, not just a body capable of extraordinary feats, but a mind that perceives ordinary challenges as training grounds for the next level of mastery. Start small tomorrow. Turn your next workout into a wisdom exercise. Let your muscles teach your mind what it's truly capable of. Epictetus, born a slave and crippled by a cruel master, discovered early that words could be weapons or shackles depending on how they were wielded. His teachings on speech weren't about eloquence, they were about tactical restraint. Imagine two men in a corporate boardroom. The first, desperate to prove his worth, dominates discussions with half-formed ideas. The second, schooled in Stoic silence, listens intently, speaking only to crystallize consensus or dismantle flawed logic with surgical precision. Over time, who commands more respect? Who's sought for counsel when stakes are high? This is the paradox of strategic silence. What you withhold often carries more weight than what you expend. Consider Warren Buffett's shareholder meetings. The Oracle of Omaha famously pauses 10 to 15 seconds before answering complex questions, a lifetime in today's soundbite culture. Those silences aren't hesitations, they're deliberate filters ensuring his responses transcend reactive thinking. Ancient Stoics called this apatheia, the discipline of separating raw impulse from measured response. Modern neuroscience confirms its power. Studies at Dartmouth College found that leaders who pause just 2 seconds before speaking are perceived as 23% more competent. Epictetus framed it bluntly: we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we can listen twice as much as we speak. Conflict resolution reveals this principle's sharpest edge. When Navy SEAL negotiate with hostile forces, they're trained to deploy silence as a tool. A tense standoff isn't broken by louder demands, but by calculated pauses that compel the other side to fill the void, often revealing critical information. Business strategist Chris Voss, former FBI hostage negotiator, teaches executives this same technique. His late-night FM DJ voice, coupled with intentional silence, drops psychological pressure like a thermostat. The Stoic twist: silence isn't passive, it's an active gravitational force that pulls truth and weakness into the open. The courtroom offers another masterclass. Legendary trial attorney Jerry Spence never won cases by out-talking opponents. His signature move, asking a piercing question, then sitting down for minutes if necessary, letting jurors marinate in the defendant's evasions. This mirrors Epictetus' advice: if someone speaks badly of you, resist the urge to defend yourself. Let their words hang until their own weight crushes them. Social media rage cycles prove the wisdom here. Every viral apology video where a celebrity immediately reacts only fuels the fire. Contrast this with Elon Musk's handling of SEC charges. His initial public silence allowed legal teams to strategize before measured responses diffused the crisis. But strategic silence isn't just about power plays. In mentorship, it creates space for growth. When a junior employee proposes a flawed plan, the instinct is to immediately correct them. The Stoic leader asks 3 probing questions instead, then observes as the protage's own reasoning exposes the gaps. Stanford's design thinking methodology formalizes this as plussing, building on ideas without negation. Pixar animators use it during creative reviews. Rather than saying, "This scene doesn't work," they ask, "What if we tried?" followed by silence that invites collaboration. Practical application starts with the 3-gate test adapted from Epictetus. Before speaking, ask 1. Is this true? Fact-check your impulse. 2. Is this necessary? Weigh the cost of engagement. 3. Is this kind? Assess impact on relationships. Tech founder Jason Fried implements a radical meeting protocol at Basecamp. No one speaks for the first 5 minutes. Attendees read a shared document silently, forming considered opinions rather than knee-jerk reactions. The result: fewer debates, more decisions. The ultimate test comes during personal attacks. When a rival smears your reputation, the amygdala screams for retaliation. The Stoic practitioner hears Seneca whispering, "A man who suffers before it's necessary suffers more than necessary." Journalist Ernest Hemingway embodied this when critics savaged his work. His response, writing The Old Man and the Sea, a masterpiece that silenced detractors without a single public rebuttal. Silence, then, isn't merely the absence of noise. It's the arena where patience outlasts impulsivity, where leverage is gained not through volume but through the unbearable weight of what remains unsaid. Master this, and you'll never again confuse speech with influence. The Stoics never shied away from the bedroom. They simply reframed sex as neither sin nor indulgence, but as a discipline. Unlike modern extremes that oscillate between puritanical shame and pornographic excess, philosophers like Musonius Rufus championed a third path: sexual intimacy as an exercise in mutual virtue. Picture 2 Roman newlyweds in the 1st century AD. Society expected the husband to dominate his wife, keeping concubines for pleasure while reserving marriage for heirs. But Stoic teachings upended this. Rufus insisted marital sex should be governed by the same principles guiding any noble friendship: respect, self-control, and shared growth. This wasn't just progressive for antiquity, it's radical even today. Modern neuroscience reveals why the Stoic approach works. Pornography floods the brain with dopamine at levels 10 times higher than natural intimacy, creating neural pathways that equate arousal with novelty and objectification. Rutgers University studies show frequent porn users experience decreased gray matter in brain regions responsible for motivation and decision-making, essentially training the mind to prefer fantasy over real connection. Contrast this with Stoic sexuality's emphasis on presence. Marcus Aurelius wrote of approaching sex with reverence and dignity, treating one's partner not as a means to gratification, but as a co-participant in something transcendent. fMRI scans of couples practicing Tantra, the closest modern parallel to Stoic intimacy, reveal synchronized brainwaves and oxytocin surges that strengthen emotional bonds while enhancing physical pleasure. The ancients didn't have brain scanners, but they grasped the neurological truth. Great sex is mindful sex. Relationship psychology confirms the Stoic advantage. Therapists Esther Perel and John Gottman observe that long-term couples maintaining erotic vitality share 2 traits. They view sex as a conversation rather than a performance, and they prioritize emotional attunement over mechanical technique. This mirrors Epictetus' distinction between natural desires, the healthy urge for connection, and vain desires, the insatiable chase for escalating novelty. A husband addicted to pornographic novelty struggles when real-world intimacy requires patience and vulnerability. But the Stoic lover trains himself through deliberate practice to find profound satisfaction in deepening a single, sacred connection. Like a sommelier savoring nuance in fine wine rather than binge-drinking cheap vodka, he cultivates discernment. Practical application starts with what psychologists call sensate focus, structured exercises where partners explore touch without orgasm as the goal. This isn't prudishness, it's recalibrating the nervous system to associate arousal with presence rather than consumption. Modern Stoics might adapt Rufus' advice by implementing tech-free intimacy zones where smartphones and thus porn access are barred from the bedroom. Others adopt the 30-day challenge, abstaining from masturbation to reset dopamine sensitivity while journaling about emotional patterns that surface. The goal isn't repression but realignment, shifting from what Seneca called the hunger of a starving man to the appreciative palate of a connoisseur. The ultimate test comes during conflict. A couple's argument about household chores rarely stays about chores. It's often displaced frustration over unmet intimate needs. The Stoic response, Aurelius' journal entry: when you're tempted to blame your partner, look inward first. Instead of passive-aggressively scrolling dating apps, the Stoic lover initiates honest dialogue about desire and disappointment. He understands that sexual ethics aren't separate from character, they're its most intimate expression. Modern men chasing conquests might rack up notches on their bedposts, but Stoics measure a different metric: the depth of trust they've earned in their partner's eyes. In the end, that's the only tally that transforms sex from transaction into transformation. Seneca once asked his students to perform a thought experiment that would make most men squirm: to wake each morning and vividly imagine losing everything they held dear. Not as morbid fixation, but as a psychological vaccine against life's inevitable blows. This practice, called negative visualization, wasn't about dwelling on darkness. It was about immunizing yourself against the shock of loss while simultaneously deepening your capacity for joy. Modern neuroscience now reveals why this ancient technique works so powerfully. When you mentally rehearse losing your spouse's laughter, your child's bedtime stories, or even the ability to walk, your brain undergoes a remarkable shift. It starts producing gratitude neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin at the mere presence of those very things. You don't wait for tragedy to appreciate what you have, you engineer that appreciation daily. Take marriage as a case study. Couples therapist Dr. John Gottman found that partners who regularly reflect on their spouse's mortality, not in a fearful way, but with conscious awareness of life's fragility, display 23% more affection and resolve conflicts 30% faster than those who avoid the topic. It's the difference between two men looking at their wedding rings. One sees a routine accessory, the other recalls the mental exercise where he pictured his wife's side of the bed empty. That's negative visualization in action, transforming the mundane into the sacred through deliberate awareness of impermanence. The midlife crisis industry thrives on the opposite approach. Advertisements sell sports cars and cosmetic procedures by exploiting the terror of time's passage, a terror that melts away when you've already sat with that reality voluntarily. Silicon Valley executives like Twitter's Jack Dorsey practice this by taking annual death awareness retreats where they write their own eulogies and simulate asset distribution. The result, they report feeling less tempted by impulsive purchases or career detours when they return to daily life. By staring down mortality on their own terms, they drain it of its power to ambush them during vulnerable moments. Practical application starts with a structured nightly ritual. Instead of generic gratitude lists, try Seneca's 3 losses exercise. 1. Relationship. Spend 60 seconds visualizing your closest person gone, not just dead, but erased from your shared history. Feel the hollow space where inside jokes once lived. 2. Ability. Picture waking up without a prized faculty, your eyesight, your hand's dexterity, your voice. 3. Possession. Imagine your home burned to ashes, leaving only what you carried on your back. At first, this feels jarring, but within weeks, something unexpected happens. You catch yourself lingering in your child's doorway before bed, really listening to your partner's rant about their day, savoring the warmth of sunlight through a window. UCLA neuroscientists found this practice thickens gray matter in the anterior cingulate cortex, the brain region responsible for emotional regulation. Essentially, you're bench pressing appreciation until it becomes reflexive. The military has adapted this technique for elite units. Navy SEAL candidates are shown videos of failed missions where their predecessors drowned or burned alive during training, not to scare them, but to inoculate them against the paralysis of real-life emergencies. When disaster strikes, their brains recognize the scenario as familiar territory rather than uncharted horror. Ordinary men can borrow this strategy. Visualizing job loss makes you appreciate current employment while simultaneously reducing panic if layoffs come. Imagining bankruptcy shifts spending from impulsive buys to value-aligned investments. There's a beautiful paradox at work here. By regularly contemplating loss, you don't become grim, you become more alive. Harvard researchers tracked two groups. One wrote about future goals, the other about their own deaths. The death awareness group showed a 40% increase in life satisfaction over 6 months. They traveled more, reconciled with estranged family, took creative risks, all because confronting finitude clarified what truly mattered. Seneca's most subversive insight was that negative visualization doesn't just prepare you for suffering, it amplifies your capacity for pleasure. A wine connoisseur who knows vineyards could burn savors each sip more deeply. A father who acknowledges children grow up quicker catches more bedtime stories. The man who understands his body will decay trains harder today. This is the ultimate rebellion against a culture addicted to distraction. It's choosing to drink deeply from the well of now, precisely because you know the well won't last forever. Start tonight before sleep. Let your mind wander to the unthinkable, not to dwell in darkness, but to kindle greater light in whatever time remains. Marcus Aurelius never made knee-jerk decisions, even on battlefields. Historians describe his war councils as exercises in systematic rationality, where every strategic choice underwent ruthless scrutiny. The emperor's deliberation process wasn't reserved for military campaigns. It was a replicable framework for navigating life's crossroads. Imagine standing at a career inflection point. Do you accept the high-paying corporate role or bootstrap your startup? Modern Stoic decision-making strips away emotional noise using Aurelius' battle-tested matrix. The first step mirrors his premeditation of obstacles. Before weighing options, list every conceivable downside of each path, not to discourage action but to pressure test your resolve. When SpaceX was deciding whether to pursue reusable rockets, Elon Musk demanded engineers document 99 ways the concept could fail. Only after they'd solved for those did greenlighting the project become a Stoic act, an informed leap rather than a blind gamble. Next comes the Stoic triage. Aurelius divided decisions into 3 tiers, those demanding immediate action, those benefiting from deliberate delay, and those beneath his attention altogether. Modernize this by creating a decision hierarchy. Jeff Bezos applies a version at Amazon with his one-way vs. two-way door rule. Irreversible choices, one-way doors, require exhaustive analysis, while reversible ones, two-way doors, merit swift experimentation. The genius lies in recognizing that most urgent decisions aren't truly urgent, they're just loud. Warren Buffett's calendar is famously empty for this reason. He preserves mental bandwidth for the few choices that genuinely move the needle. The third step channels Aurelius' view from above. Before finalizing any major decision, project yourself 5 years into the future. How will this choice resonate across your personal legacy, professional trajectory, and relationships? When Howard Schultz was offered $30 million to sell Starbucks in 1987, He didn't just crunch numbers, he walked Seattle's streets imagining the espresso bars he might never build. That visceral projection of regret convinced him to borrow money to buy the company instead. Neuroscience confirms this technique's power. Brain scans show that when people simulate future scenarios in vivid detail, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex activates the same region responsible for rational decision-making. Essentially, you're giving your future self a vote in today's choices. Now introduce the Stoic veto. Every Roman war council included a designated dissenter, the adversarius whose sole job was to poke holes in plans. Clone this by appointing an imaginary skeptic for your decisions. If pondering a job change, ask, what would my most critical mentor say about this move? When Sarah Blakely considered investing her life savings into Spanx prototypes, she pretended her skeptical father was grilling her about fabrics and distribution channels. Those mental interrogations exposed gaps she filled before risking capital. The military formalizes this with red team/blue team exercises where dedicated groups attack and defend strategies. Your personal decisions deserve equal rigor. Finally, implement the post-decision protocol. Aurelius didn't second-guess moves once made. He documented rationales to review when outcomes were uncertain. Create a decision journal, not just recording choices, but the Stoic principles guiding them. Ray Dalio's mistake logs at Bridgewater Associates track the reasoning behind every major trade, creating a feedback loop between principles and results. When a decision fails, you're not left wondering if the process was flawed or just the execution. This transforms failures into calibrated adjustments rather than existential crises. The matrix crystallizes like this. 1. Pre-mortem list all failure modes. 2. Triage categorize by reversibility and impact. 3. Temporal projection envision 5-year repercussions. 4. Adversarial review stress test with deliberate skepticism. 5. Post-action audit document rationale for future pattern recognition. Apply this to relationships, investments, even parenting. Should you relocate for love, the pre-mortem might reveal loneliness in a new city. Triage confirms it's reversible. The 5-year view shows career trade-offs. The adversary asks if you're fleeing problems rather than solving them. The journal entry anchors your why. Suddenly, what felt like a leap in the dark becomes a series of calculated steps across illuminated stones. That's the Stoic difference, not avoiding uncertainty, but navigating it with intention. Every crossroad becomes a classroom when you bring this level of deliberation to the choices that shape your life. Marcus Aurelius wrote his meditations by candlelight before dawn, not as a literary exercise but as psychological armor for the day ahead. The Stoic morning routine wasn't about productivity hacks or checking tasks off a list. It was a deliberate series of mental and physical calibrations designed to align ambition with virtue before the world could intrude. Modern science now confirms what these philosophers intuited. The first 90 minutes after waking determine cognitive performance, emotional resilience, and decision-making quality for the next 16 hours. Reconstructing their ancient practices reveals a blueprint for engineering mornings that don't just start your day but fortify your character. Begin with what the Stoics called prosauche, the discipline of attention. Before reaching for your phone or gulping coffee, Epictetus advised students to spend 5 minutes in silent self-possession. Neuroscientists call this frontal lobe activation, where deliberate stillness primes your brain's executive center to regulate impulses later. Navy SEAL practice a similar technique with box breathing. Inhale 4 seconds, hold 4, exhale 4 to establish metabolic control before chaos hits. The modern adaptation: install a gatekeeper habit, 60 seconds of intentional breathing while mentally reciting a Stoic maxim like Marcus Aurelius. Today I'll meet interference, ingratitude, and arrogance, but I won't let them distract me from my work. This isn't passive meditation, it's active cognitive programming. Physical movement came next. Roman Stoics didn't hit the gym, they trained for functional resilience. Seneca would take brisk morning walks regardless of weather, while Cato deliberately wore thin clothing in winter to harden his body against discomfort. Today's equivalent might combine primal movement patterns, squatting, crawling, hanging with cold exposure. Stanford researcher Dr. Andrew Huberman advocates NSDR, non-sleep deep rest post-exercise, a 10-minute horizontal recovery period mimicking the Stoic practice of Melite Thanatu meditation on mortality. The synergy is deliberate. Physical stress followed by intentional recovery teaches your nervous system to embrace challenge without panic. The Stoic planning ritual flips modern to-do lists on their head. Rather than cataloging tasks, Marcus Aurelius journaled about anticipated obstacles and virtues needed to overcome them. Picture a construction foreman not just listing "meet client at 10 a.m." but writing, "This client will test my patience with unreasonable demands. I'll respond with calm clarity, remembering that his behavior reflects his struggles, not my worth." Psychologists call this implementation intention, and studies show it increases follow-through by 200%. Try this hybrid approach. 1. Obstacle forecast. Today's friction points will likely be. 2. Virtue assignment. I'll meet these with e.g. patience, courage, creativity. 3. Anchor task. One must complete action that aligns with your long-term mission. Tech entrepreneur Kevin Rose combines this with a not-to-do list items like don't check email before noon or don't attend meetings without agendas. The Stoics would approve. They saw mornings as sacred space for proactive intent before reactive demands colonized attention. Nutrition followed Stoic simplicity. Breakfast wasn't skipped or turned into a feast, it was fuel designed to avoid sluggishness. Roman soldiers ate pulse, a humble porridge of spelt and olive oil that provided steady energy without indulgence. Modern equivalents might include protein-rich meals with fermented foods for gut-brain axis support, avoiding blood sugar spikes that hijack focus. Neuroscientist Dr. Gabby Lyon recommends 30 grams of protein within 30 minutes of waking to optimize dopamine and norepinephrine neurotransmitters the Stoics indirectly nurtured through disciplined eating habits. The final element, often overlooked, was premeditatio malorum, premeditation of evils. Before stepping into his day, Seneca would visualize everything that could go wrong. Meetings running late, colleagues provoking him, projects derailing. This wasn't pessimism, it was emotional inoculation. When Navy SEAL conduct mission rehearsals, they visualize equipment failures and ambushes so actual crises feel familiar rather than shocking. Apply this by spending 2 minutes mentally walking through your day's worst-case scenarios: a deal collapsing, a conflict escalating, technology failing. Then script your Stoic response. If X happens, I'll remember Y. What makes this routine uniquely Stoic isn't the activities themselves, but their sequencing and intent. Each element, stillness, movement, planning, nourishment, and mental rehearsal, builds upon the last like layers of armor. The breathing practice steels your mind, movement fortifies your body, virtuous planning aligns your actions, smart fueling sustains your energy, and obstacle visualization prepares your resilience. Together, they transform mornings from a frantic launchpad into a daily recommitment to your highest self. Modern high performers unknowingly echo these principles. Apple CEO Tim Cook starts at 4:30 a.m. with exercise and strategic reading. Author Jocko Willink combines pre-dawn workouts with reflective journaling. The common thread isn't the specific habits, but the ritualized stacking of mental, physical, and intentional disciplines. Your challenge isn't to replicate Marcus Aurelius' candlelit journaling or Seneca's cold walks exactly, but to engineer your own Stoic launch sequence. Perhaps it's 5 minutes of breathwork followed by kettlebell swings, a cold shower, and obstacle mapping over black coffee. The key is that each element serves a philosophical purpose beyond mere efficiency. It's training for the life you want while preparing for the challenges that will test that vision. Because dawn isn't just a time on the clock, it's the daily proving ground for the kind of man you're becoming. Epictetus taught his students to approach social interactions like a skilled archer handles his bow, focusing solely on their own aim, never obsessing over the target's movements. This ancient principle holds the key to modern networking's greatest paradox. The more you desperately chase connections, the fewer meaningful ones you create. The Stoic art of relationship building rejects today's transactional tactics, the LinkedIn spam, the calculated favors, the name-dropping, in favor of something far more powerful, becoming the kind of person others naturally want in their orbit. Picture two men at a tech conference. The first works the room like a politician, collecting business cards while mentally tallying potential uses for each contact. The second engages in 3 deep conversations about industry pain points, offering insights without expecting immediate returns. 12 months later, one has a stack of forgotten contacts, the other has 3 collaborators for his startup. The foundational shift comes in redefining what makes a connection high value. For the Stoics, a relationship's worth wasn't measured by the other person's status, but by the mutual growth it facilitated. Seneca's letters to Lucilius weren't flattery-laden petitions. They were rigorous exchanges where both men sharpened each other's thinking. Modern research validates this approach. Harvard's longitudinal study on professional success found that individuals with developmental networks, small groups of relationships focused on reciprocal improvement, outperformed those with vast but shallow Rolodexes by every metric from promotions to life satisfaction. The Stoic twist: Epictetus would urge you to audit your network not by asking, "Who can help me?" but "Who makes me better?" When entrepreneur Naval Ravikant describes his ideal inner circle as "people who won't let me get away with bullshit," he's channeling this exact ethos. Practical application starts with what psychologists call the principle of least effort. Just as water flows downhill, authentic influence follows the path of genuine contribution. Take author Ryan Holiday's early career strategy. Instead of cold emailing famous authors for blurbs, he wrote meticulous reviews of their work, adding original analysis that sparked real dialogue. Soon, mentors like Robert Greene were reaching out to him. This mirrors Seneca's advice: if you wish to be loved, love. The neuroscience behind this is fascinating. When you provide value without immediate expectation, sharing a relevant article, making an unexpected introduction, your brain releases oxytocin, creating intrinsic satisfaction separate from any reciprocation. Over time, this rewires social behavior from calculated giving to authentic generosity. Boundary setting is where Stoic networking diverges sharply from modern yes-man tactics. Epictetus warned against relationships requiring you to trade your peace for their approval. Imagine a junior executive constantly accepting drinks with a senior partner who subtly belittles him. Conventional wisdom says tolerate it for career advancement. The Stoic alternative: limit exposure while doubling down on connections where mutual respect exists. Research on toxic ties at Columbia Business School shows that stressful professional relationships can spike cortisol levels higher than outright enemies. The solution isn't burning bridges, but gradual reallocation of energy, what investor Tim Ferriss calls relationship portfolio rebalancing. For introverts, Stoicism offers particular relief. Marcus Aurelius, who described himself as a man cramped by ceremony, found power in selective engagement. His journals reveal a strategy modern consultants might call presence multiplication, attending fewer events but making deeper impacts when present. Behavioral scientists find that introverted leaders often build stronger networks precisely because their selective participation signals discernment rather than scarcity. The key is preparation, arriving early to secure meaningful one-on-one conversations before crowds form. or following up with tailored notes referencing specific discussions rather than generic pleasantries. Digital networking demands special Stoic vigilance. LinkedIn's gamified interface triggers dopamine loops that encourage connection hoarding. Apply Epictetus' discipline of assent before hitting connect. Ask, would I invest an hour with this person next week if they asked? Platform algorithms actually favor selective engagement. Users with smaller but more interactive networks see higher post visibility than those with thousands of dormant connections. Consider mimicking Warren Buffett's approach to correspondence. His famously sparse emails force recipients to prioritize substance over frequency. The ultimate test comes during transitions. When changing industries or launching ventures, most people frantically mine contacts for leads. The Stoic prepares years earlier by cultivating weak ties, not strangers, but light connections maintained through occasional value sharing. Sociologist Mark Granovetter's seminal work found that breakthrough opportunities often come through these peripheral relationships if they're nurtured without desperation. A simple habit like quarterly check-in emails, sharing industry observations, not personal requests, keeps these channels warm. Epictetus' most radical networking lesson. If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish in the eyes of strangers. Real influence grows when you stop performing for invisible juries and start engaging from uncompromising authenticity. The executive who admits ignorance during a panel discussion often earns more respect than the know-it-all. The founder who emails a potential mentor saying, "Here's where I'm stuck," frequently receives better guidance than one pretending to have all the answers. That's the Stoic edge, networking not as a means to an end, but as the daily practice of becoming someone whose very presence elevates every room they enter. Seneca watched in dismay as his wealthy friend Lucilius celebrated his latest promotion, not with quiet gratitude, but by commissioning a gold statue of himself. This scene from ancient Rome captures success's great paradox. The more you achieve, the more achievement can corrupt you. In letters to Lucilius, Seneca warned that prosperity is far more dangerous than adversity because it erodes character invisibly. Where poverty shouts its lessons in your face, wealth whispers destructive lies in your ear. Modern neuroscience confirms this ancient insight. Brain scans show that sudden status boosts trigger dopamine surges identical to cocaine, rewiring neural pathways to crave external validation over intrinsic growth. That's why so many lottery winners go bankrupt and why 80% of professional athletes face financial ruin within 3 years of retirement. Success doesn't ruin people, undisciplined success does. The first peril Stoics identified: the illusion of meritocracy. Seneca observed how accomplished men often attribute their success solely to personal brilliance while blaming failures on external factors. This self-serving bias creates what psychologists now call the arrogant spiral. Each achievement inflates the ego until humility becomes impossible. Consider two tech founders. One views his IPO as proof of genius, firing dissenters who challenge his vision. The other, trained in Stoic principles, remembers that market timing, lucky breaks, and forgotten mentors contributed to his win. The first crashes when industry shifts expose his rigidity. The second adapts because his identity wasn't hostage to his success. Warren Buffett embodies this mindset, still referring to himself as a lucky sperm club member despite his investing prowess, a phrase that keeps his accomplishments in perspective. Fame presents its own traps. The Roman general Marius decorated his home with victory statues until his house became less a dwelling and more a shrine to his ego. Seneca's antidote was what he called the pretense of obscurity, periodically imagining the public's admiration had vanished. Modern equivalents include celebrities like Keanu Reeves taking subway rides incognito or billionaire Sarah Blakely cleaning her own toilets despite her wealth. These aren't acts of false modesty, they're psychological exercises proving one's worth isn't contingent on applause. Research on the spotlight effect reveals we vastly overestimate how much others scrutinize us, a realization that liberates high achievers from performative exhaustion. Wealth's greatest distortion is its power to numb ambition. Ancient Stoics noticed how prosperity often breeds complacency. The millionaire who stops learning, the artist who recycles old work once fans cheer anything they produce. Marcus Aurelius combated this by appointing a slave to whisper, "You're just a man," during his triumphal parades. Today's version might be Elon Musk reinvesting his PayPal millions into risky ventures like SpaceX instead of buying a private island. The key insight: money should amplify purpose, not replace it. Studies on the hedonic treadmill show luxury quickly becomes baseline. Yesterday's dream house becomes today's ordinary address unless paired with deeper goals. The Stoic solution to these perils rests on 3 daily practices. First, reverse visualization. Spending 5 minutes each morning imagining you've lost everything your resume boasts. Not to induce fear, but to rediscover the baseline happiness no title or bank balance provides. Second, invisible service, pursuing at least one meaningful action each day that'll never appear on your LinkedIn, whether mentoring an intern anonymously or volunteering incognito. Third, the critic's chair, mentally inviting your harshest skeptic to critique your latest win. When Salesforce CEO Mark Benioff received praise for philanthropy, he invited activists to scrutinize his company's wage gaps, a move that led to real policy changes rather than hollow PR. Seneca's most chilling warning was that success often isolates winners in gilded cages. His letters describe powerful men surrounded by yes men, their truth detection atrophied like unused muscles. The modern equivalent, executives who only hear filtered information through layers of assistants, or influencers whose comment sections become echo chambers. The antidote is deliberate friction, what psychologist Adam Grant calls challenge networks. Surround yourself with people contractually obligated to disagree with you, like a board member paid to play devil's advocate or a spouse whose approval isn't tied to your net worth. History's greatest achievers understood this balancing act. When George Washington surrendered his military command after the Revolutionary War, an unprecedented relinquishment of power, he wasn't just being noble, he was safeguarding his character from the rot of unchecked authority. Similarly, when Nobel laureate Richard Feynman turned down Princeton's ivory tower to teach freshmen at Caltech, he was protecting his curiosity from the narcotic of prestige. That's the ultimate takeaway. Real success isn't measured by what you gain, but by what you remain. The medals tarnish, the money fluctuates, the applause fades, but the man you built in the process. That's the one reward no market crash or scandal can take from you. Marcus Aurelius never intended his journals to be found. The most powerful man in the ancient world wrote to himself, wrestling with doubt and growth in private, yet his words ended up guiding millions across centuries. That's the paradox of Stoic mentorship. The deepest influence often comes not from preaching, but from embodying principles so completely that others seek to emulate your example. This final lesson isn't about adding new tools to your arsenal. It's about how to synthesize all 24 previous teachings into a living legacy that lifts others while still honing your own edge. Consider 2 fathers teaching their sons to swim. The first lectures from the pool deck, shouting instructions while staying dry. The second slips into the water, demonstrating strokes alongside his child, feeling the same resistance against his own skin. Stoic mentorship mirrors the second approach, its leadership through shared practice, not abstract theory. When Navy SEAL train new recruits, the most effective instructors aren't those who have retired to classrooms, but those who still run drills alongside their teams, their weathered faces proof that the standards are humanly possible. That's the first shift. Transitioning from practitioner to mentor doesn't mean you've arrived. It means you're now accountable to someone watching how you handle the grind. Generational leadership thrives on what psychologists call the protégé effect. Studies at Washington University show that people who teach concepts immediately after learning them retain nearly 90% more than those who don't share their knowledge. The Stoics anticipated this 2,000 years earlier. Seneca's letters to Lucilius weren't just altruistic, they forced him to clarify his own thinking. Modern parallels exist in tech leaders like Jeff Bezos, who institutionalized his two-pizza rule. Teams small enough to be fed with 2 pizzas not through memos, but by consistently modeling the behavior in meetings. When a junior engineer saw Bezos himself dismantling bloated project groups, the lesson stuck harder than any handbook could. But here's where Stoic mentorship diverges from conventional coaching. Ancient philosophers didn't just transfer skills, they cultivated discernment. Epictetus students didn't leave with a checklist of Stoic-approved responses. They developed the ability to interrogate their own judgments. A modern equivalent might be a CEO who walks per te, gaze through his decision journals rather than just sharing conclusions. Picture a finance veteran showing his mentee not just how to analyze a balance sheet, but his handwritten notes from the 2008 crash, the fears he overcame, the biases he caught. That's the gold standard, teaching others to fish by revealing how you learn to cast your own line. The military provides perhaps the purest model of this. Marine Corps officers eat last literally. This tradition isn't about false humility. It's a visceral lesson in priorities that no PowerPoint could convey. When a lieutenant sees his captain shivering in the same inadequate shelter during winter exercises, leadership transforms from a buzzword to a lived principle. Business strategist Simon Sinek popularized this concept, but the Stoics originated it. Musonius Rufus insisted teachers must sweat alongside their students in the wrestling pit or forfeit their right to instruct. Practical implementation starts with what psychologists term scaffolding. Instead of dumping all 24 Stoic lessons onto a protege at once, identify which principles are most relevant to their current struggles. A college graduate drowning in career options needs different guidance than a midlife executive facing ethical compromises. Ancient teachers tailored their approach. Seneca adjusted his letters based on Lucilius' evolving challenges. Modern mentors can replicate this with a simple 3-question intake. 1. What decision keeps you up at night? 2. Where do you feel most out of your depth? 3. What's a recent situation you'd handle differently with hindsight? The answers reveal whether to emphasize control, lesson 1, Amor Fati, lesson 2, or another pillar first. The most transformative mentorship often happens through storytelling, not polished parables, but raw recollections of your own stumbles. When SpaceX's Gwynne Shotwell mentors young engineers, she shares not just rocket science triumphs but her early career blunders, like freezing during a critical presentation. That vulnerability accomplishes what stern advice can't. It normalizes struggle as part of mastery. The Stoics called this turning obstacles into fuel. Your worst failures become kindling for others' progress. Yet Stoic mentorship guards against one toxic trap, the savior complex. Epictetus warned teachers not to chain students to your own worldview. Modern psychology confirms the danger overbearing mentors create dependency rather than autonomy. The antidote, Socratic questioning. When a protege asks whether to quit their job, resist solving their problem. Ask instead, what virtues would staying or leaving develop? How would your 80-year-old self evaluate this crossroads? This builds the muscle of self-governance. Legendary basketball coach Phil Jackson mastered this. His players recall fewer speeches than piercing questions that force them to find their own answers. The ultimate test of Stoic mentorship, how your disciples fare when you're absent. When Warren Buffett eventually retires, his true legacy won't be Berkshire Hathaway's stock price. It'll be the generation of value investors he's trained to think independently. Similarly, your measure as a mentor isn't how many people quote you, but how many outgrow the need for your advice while still honoring your example. This brings us full circle to Marcus Aurelius, whose private writings became public treasures. His journals weren't meant for us, yet they endure because he held himself to standards so rigorous that even his unpolished self-reflections uplift generations. That's the final challenge. Live deliberately enough that your worst days still inspire others' best efforts. Because true Stoic mentorship isn't about creating followers, it's about awakening fellow travelers who'll walk further than you ever could alone. Picture a young executive standing on the rooftop of his high-rise office, gripping his phone as another late-night email drains the last of his energy. 3 years ago, he was the hungry startup founder sleeping on couches, hustling for every client. Now, with the corner office and luxury car, he's more exhausted than ever. But tonight, something shifts. He remembers a single Stoic principle from this very video, Memento Mori, the reminder that time slips away like sand through fingers. He puts the phone down, walks to the edge, watches the city lights flicker like distant stars, and makes a decision not to quit but to reclaim. Starting tomorrow, he'll implement just one of these 25 lessons. Maybe it's the morning ritual from Marcus Aurelius, perhaps it's Seneca's premeditation of adversity, or Epictetus' circle of control. The specific choice matters less than the act of choosing, the deliberate pivot from passive consumption to active mastery. This moment is where philosophy transforms from parchment to power. The Stoics didn't write for academics, they forged mental tools for butchers, bakers, and emperors alike. Their wisdom survived millennia not because it's eloquent, but because it works when applied. Like the entrepreneur who credits Amor Fati for turning a failed product launch into his company's breakthrough. Or the father who used Musonius Rufus' relationship principles to repair a fractured bond with his son. These aren't theoretical victories, they're living proof that courage, resilience, and clarity aren't inherited traits. They're muscles built through daily repetition of the very lessons you've just discovered. Your challenge isn't to master all 25 principles at once. That's the perfectionist's trap. The Stoic way is gradual, deliberate. Start with one. Let it breathe in your life for 7 days. Watch how a single change, like journaling each evening or reframing obstacles as fuel, creates ripple effects you couldn't predict. The Roman general Scipio Africanus didn't conquer Carthage in a day. He won battle by battle, choice by choice. Your modern Carthage, whether it's burnout, self-doubt, or fractured focus, falls the same way. And if you're hungry for more, if you're ready to move from dipping your toes to diving deep into the Stoic way of life, hit subscribe now, because this isn't the end of your journey, it's the first step. Up next, we'll break down Seneca's lost letters on building unshakable confidence, analyze Marcus Aurelius' battle strategies for decision fatigue, and reconstruct the Stoic secret system for turning adversity into advantage. But for now, pick your first lesson. The clock's ticking, and greatness, your version of it, waits for no one.